guest on today's Big Blend Radio Show is best-selling and award-winning Colorado author Samuel Marquis. He's joining us to talk about his latest novel, Soldiers of Freedom, and it details the true story of the 1944 through 1945 war in Western Europe and the final Allied struggle to conquer Nazi Germany. Now, Samuel, he's like best-selling and award-winning. Like, I'm serious. The list is insane. I encourage you to go to his website and look at the list of books, the list of awards. It's SamuelMarquisBooks.com, and that's Marquis. I can spell, I promise. But he's also, when it talk about the series, he's got his World War II series, the Nick Lassiter Schuyler International Espionage series, the Joe High Eagle Environmental Sleuth series, and there's also Blackbeard the Pirate, which we want to talk about that too. So welcome, Samuel. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Oh, doing good. Doing good. It's so interesting. We travel full time, and we have landed in Florence, Colorado. So I don't think we're that far from you, right? You're up in Boulder area.
Yeah, you're just about an hour and a half away, maybe 2 hours.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Wow. And this is amazing because I know, like, what is up with like the Denver region and just Colorado with writing? It seems like it seems pretty prolific that writers hang out here a lot in this state.
Yeah, it's also interesting that you're in Florence. The opening scene of my earthquake thriller Blind Thrust has a sort of paleontological dinosaur dig right near where you are right now.
Oh, cool.
So it's kind of funny.
Oh, really?
I didn't think of it until you just said it. But
what kind of dinosaur?
We got the Unabomber in our backyard too, and El Chapo, but we'll keep going on that today on today's show. It's a cute town. It's a cute town, but well, there's like the fossil beds, fluorescent fossil beds, and all that. Not too far from here either. So this area, it feels really ancient to us because we travel going to parks, and there's just something that is different about the area. You just feel like, I don't know, like it's like you're into geology and all of that good stuff, right? That's the other part, the hydrogeologist. So there's like all kinds of good stuff underneath us. It's almost, I don't want to say be weird, but it almost feels like we're in a very ancient graveyard. Let's put it that way.
That's exactly what it is. Ancient boneyard of, dinosaurs and all kinds of other fossils. So, just because the Rocky Mountains were uplifted. So that's why, fortunately, they came to the surface. So now we can find them.
Wow. So all this geology and paleontology and understanding all that natural world and natural history, what led you into the world of writing?
Well, people ask that in a lot of the interviews and radio shows and stuff that I've done over the past. And the answer is that I always loved writing, and always, in even in college, it would be a geology major where you're kind of have to do a lot of science in support of geology. I still took like 4 English classes, so I always kind of loved writing. And I, even as a scientist, I've published maybe like 25 professional papers dealing with geology that are very technical and boring. But I've always liked to write.
That's cool. That's and that's, to me, Nancy's been reading your book, Soldiers of Freedom, and she keeps running out and telling me, this is so timely of today. Like, the Soldiers of Freedom and what's happening in our country now. I mean, could you have predicted that?
No, I didn't predict that. But the problem is it's an ongoing struggle. So, between Lisa and Nancy, I mean, you're reading Soldiers of Freedom. So, the black struggle of this African American tank unit, the 761st Tank Battalion, was the first African American tank unit in U.S. history. They were requested by Patton specifically, who was the first to implement black tankers, but he was also the first to integrate rifle companies. And a lot of people don't give Patton credit for kind of initiating that. Manpower was short, so he was motivated by that too. But he did the right thing, by Americans by supporting the black troops in action and during World War II. And, it's amazing what these guys went through. Jackie Robinson was an original member of the 761st Tank Division. And, and he's in my book that, that you're reading. And what these guys went through is amazing. And then it's still obviously the struggle's still continuing.
It's interesting to me. I got kind of stuck on the teenagers that formed, like the Hitler's group of teenagers that were out in the streets and looking for Germans that were not behind Hitler. So you had two groups of teenagers almost here that, I look at today and I'm thinking, okay, if something similar happened right now, would we have teenagers that would pick sides and go to bat like that? Like,
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is yes. I mean, so you're talking about, Angela Lang in my book is part of the Edelweiss Pirates, which was a German anti-Nazi resistance group within Germany of young teenagers who were kind of, like about love and freedom, and they'd go on picnics, camping trips in the woods, and then, they'd fight Hitler Youth, and they'd actually, they'd post anti-Nazi graffiti, and they were, rebellious youth on the one hand to some extent, but they were anti-Nazi freedom fighters on the other. And unfortunately, they were battling the Hitler Youth, who was, these indoctrinated right-wing Nazis. And they were trying to, they're basically fighting them on the streets of Cologne during World War II, and other streets, like other cities like Dusseldorf and Hamburg too.
Oh wow. It kind of reminds me of Africa too, because there were also teenagers. We lived over there when they would end up in the military. Not even the military. They were just kind of like, you're going to fight to just save your own home turf. And I think that happens in the streets of America. It's like you got to fight for your right. You know what I mean? You really do. So it's kind of interesting, this full circle. Kind of reminds me of the Tuskegee Airmen and, what they did, and how, I don't know if our country has really realized, how, it's like the Navajo code talkers of how much, how many races, or I should say, came together to fight and unite and fight, and I think I appreciate what you're doing, telling the story, because I don't think a lot of us know. I'm still hung up on the Tuskegee Airmen too. I just really, people didn't realize what they did, and so it's
it's a great story, and it's a good movie with that I've seen, and with Lawrence Fishburne, I think is in it, and it's a good movie, and
he'd be good for that,
So I watch a lot of World War II movies to kind of come up with ideas, but I'm always looking for. If you haven't read my other books, but I'm trying to find the people, or I have one book on overlooked Norwegian resistance fighters who were women, who were overlooked by history, so I'm kind of digging out these people, and a lot of people are they're mining these stories now of who fought in World War II that was kind of forgotten, or who was neglected, and clearly the African American tankers. I mean, these guys were heroes. You want to talk about the outrageous things that these guys had to put up with, and the fighting that they did, and all they wanted to do was be equal. All they wanted to do was not be treated any different than the other white tankers. They didn't want anything big. They didn't want any special treatment, and they were incredibly well trained. They also had, they had very high, the tests that they took. They had to have a certain kind of, IQ. You don't want to call it IQ, but high level of proficiency to even be selected, that was higher than even white, candidates. So they were kind of screened out. Same with the Tuskegee Airmen. Those guys were, had tests, multiple tests to even get to be able to fight in World War II. And, these guys are heroes. They're American heroes.
And isn't it when they went overseas? Here we are in the wars there, and then overseas, like in France, they were treated as equals. So they didn't understand, why am I coming home? I'm fighting, with our army for this country. I'm fighting, yet when I'm overseas, people are treating me as equal. There's that too.
Absolutely. That's and I think the amazing thing is, even at the end, the Germans treated them far better. The Germans who were just being vanquished, or in the process of being vanquished, treated them much better. And a lot of them actually took German wives. A lot of the black tankers in the 761st Tank Division took on German wives and stayed over there, because they were like, I'm not going to come home. The Germans, the ex-Nazis, not the ex-Nazis really, probably more progressive-minded Germans is who they were, kind of befriending. But they stayed over there, some of them, and that's in my book. There's a little thing when you get to the afterword, you'll get a lot of information. Now, who's reading the book? Is it Nancy or Lisa?
Nancy.
Right, well, at the end of the book, be sure to read that because that gives you the whole history of how the 761st finally got recognized for their achievements and, kind of what they thought about their whole struggle. And it's an amazing kind of story that I just discovered these guys, just kind of stumbled upon them.
Oh, definitely finish it. It's a great book. It's well written. And you kind of remind me, I don't know if you know who Wilbur Smith is. He's a South African.
No, I absolutely know who Wilbur Smith is. So that's a compliment.
Yeah.
Big one, yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that, the attention to passion and detail, which is not an easy thing for people to write. Like to get the details, and not leave out passion. Because sometimes when you're reading historic novels, which I dearly love, you get all the facts and none of the passion, or you get all the passion but none of the facts. I've always felt like I hated history in school. Sorry, teachers, but you just made me hate history. Now I love it, and I wish that historic novelists were teaching history classes. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, and I know what you're saying. I have to strike a balance between that because I am very detail oriented because I have a master's of science degree and I'm a practicing hydrogeologist, so obviously I'm kind of nerdy. But then you got to keep the suspense. So Angela, she's always every scene is scary with her in Cologne. She's being chased by Nazis, and the tankers are coming up against top Wehrmacht divisions in the Battle of the Bulge. And I don't want to spoil the book because I know you haven't finished it yet. But so I try and juice suspense. I put in a lot of detail though, and and I think most of my fans and book readers tend to like that, and there's some who are said it's a little more detailed than I like, but I still liked it. And then there's others, who would prefer it just more kind of less detail. But it's the way I do it, and I want to make sure that you're reading a history book under a historical fiction, guise. Really, I'm kind of that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think it's so important. That's I grew up, reading historical fiction, and it's how it got me into history personally, and then also traveling everywhere and going to the sites and understanding what a battlefield is, and understanding that, when you go to a battlefield, you really get it, and then it kind of merges with as you read more, and but to have the facts in there and the details to me is really important because I think it's one of the ways people are going to learn is, by reading your style of book. I did want to touch on Patton because I really didn't realize he did all that, in regards to the African-American tankers. I really didn't. We just left 29 Palms in the Mojave Desert in California, and his stuff is everywhere. He's in Mojave National Preserve. They have like a whole thing of what he ran tanks through that whole area. And he has his own tank museum just out of a place called Desert City. Right off by the gas station.
That's where he trained. He trained a lot of tank divisions there, and shortly after Pearl Harbor for that first kind of, really we weren't geared up till we got into North Africa, Tunisia, which of course Patton led that invasion into North Africa. The Americans coming in, and we had to fight the Vichy French initially to take, get a stronghold. And the British were already in Egypt and moving, Montgomery was moving west, and we kind of met up in Tunisia. But, and that wasn't until, 43 or, late 42, early 43, all that happened. So there was a whole year of training, and Patton was in the California desert. And, he was from California. He grew up in the Los Angeles area, even though his family had southern roots, and he had a lot of family that fought in the Civil War and stuff. He came from 4 generations of soldiers, basically, going back to like the American Revolution or for sure the Civil War.
do you travel to go, with what you're writing in history? And then we have to talk about Blackbeard. There's no way we can't. We have to. And
Okay.
because I've got to, I understand that we're not allowed to say pirate. It's privateer. I do understand that. I learned that from the Battle of New Orleans, that they would like to be called privateers. But do you travel out for your books, for the research, and just to get the sense of feel of a place?
Yeah, I went to Europe before I wrote this last book, and I was there before for the other books I write. So I go to as many locations as I can, that time and obviously cost allows. So I went to most of the places in this book, I was able to get to. So I was there at Bastogne, I was there all over the Battle of the Bulge, all over along the Rhineland where those battles were. I was at the campaigns, after Normandy, across France and all of those places. And so, I was, and for Blackbeard, I was, just since you want to touch on, Blackbeard was a pirate. I'm the 9th grade grandson of Captain William Kidd, and that's my new book, by the way.
No
just
way.
So you know.
Oh,
yes.
Oh,
and
cool.
so I'm the Navy, but he was a privateer. He was not he was hung for piracy, but he wasn't a pirate. And I'll fight that, tooth and nail till the bitter end because I'm writing a book about it now. But there was a crossover. Remember, privateers are legal pirate, legalized pirates who had letters of marque and reprisal to go fight enemy shipping. So they were licensed pirates basically.
Okay.
So and then pirates obviously were not licensed, so they were attacking enemy shipping of all countries. And that's why the British and the authorities at the time labeled them unfairly as the enemies of all mankind, when in reality a lot of pirates were simply trying to get a fair wage because the British Royal Navy and the other navies were just so brutal and savage. So they were just, a lot of them were not, a lot of them were outlaws who were desperate, roguish, rape, pillage, plunder, probably, some percentage of pirates were just outlaws. But a lot of them were guys who had families, and new research is showing, had extended families and children, and lived in New York. Was a very big pirate stronghold in the late 1600s and early 1700s, and I'm writing about that right now in my book on Captain Kidd, and South Carolina, even Boston had, and Providence, Rhode Island was definitely a place, and also a number of places in the West Indies. So all of these, piracy was a way to fuel the economic growth of the colonies. And so a lot of these guys were just trying to get a fair wage. So a lot of them were just average guys, were not outlaws. Yeah, I mean, they were outlaws only because they were made to be outlaws, but they actually contributed to the colonial economy. And a lot of the colonial authorities looked the other way because they knew it was fueling the growth of America. So my new book, Captain Kidd, it's called Captain Kidd, The Betrayal of a Colonial American Patriot. That's what it's called. Just like Blackbeard's called Blackbeard, The Birth of America, because early colonial, our little war of independence, really kind of began its earliest signs in the late 1600s and early 1700s with piracy. The British Empire is built on piracy. If you didn't know that, it was that basically Queen Elizabeth legalized.
Yeah, really.
Sir Francis Drake and Henry Morgan were.
Dude, Sir Francis Drake was bad. Like, I did a thing on him because we went to Point Reyes National Seashore, and everything is Drake this, Drake that. And so we have one of our experts, Glenn Burrows in England. He's a history expert, and he takes people around England. So we have this thing that we do as we travel the country to, have these English history connections. And Sir Francis Drake, I was like, dude, you are mean. And so Elizabeth's all la-di-da, and then he's got the Golden Hind, I think his ship was called, or whatever. I want to call the Hind. But, I mean,
he was knighted.
Spanish.
Don't forget he was knighted by, and Henry Morgan was knighted too. They were both Sir Francis Drake and Sir Henry Morgan.
Yeah,
but they were pirates. They're glorified. They're privateers, but they were, the difference between them and a pirate's negligible. and they, because they treated, they were brutal towards the Spaniards, but the Spanish were brutal towards the English and French too.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, piracy, was war, So
and now we have it on the internet. People stealing books and music and artwork and stuff. It's like a whole different part of it. But it's interesting, when you go into the piracy part. I wanted to ask, have you gone through Louisiana at all? Because of the World War II history, we just came through there last year. We did a lot in what's known as no man's land, and it was basically this, when Louisiana became Louisiana, there was this 3 year stretch, of where it was known as the neutral strip. There was no law and order, and piracy was rampant in this whole area from like southwest Louisiana, Lake Charles, up through the Toledo Bend area, up to Shreveport, Louisiana. But that was also like a huge area later, way later, obviously, a couple hundred years later, for World War II maneuvers. So I was wondering if you've been through any of that area just on the pirates and the World War II history.
I haven't, but I know, one of the French famous pirates that I'm aware of was Lafitte. And so I'm not sure exactly when he was, but I think he was in the 1800s, a little, maybe early 1800s. There's an interesting history there, and that might be a later book, because I'm kind of interested in the French in the New World, because they were very much more liberal and progressive and treated the natives better and integrated with them. That's why French fur trappers intermarried a lot with the native tribes up north. So I'm kind of intrigued by the British had a different approach. The French had a different approach than the British. The British came in as, we want to make the world England. You do what we say, and we're going to take all your, we're going to tax you, to kingdom come, and you be like us, and you just do what we tell you. The French were much more assimilative and interesting, and so I'm kind of trying. I'm just getting into pirates. My second book, so I'm not as expert on it as I am kind of World War II. But there's a lot of good stories out there. There's a lot of interesting things where, like Blackbeard, for instance, had black crew members that he treated as equals. One of the closest in my book was Caesar, who fought with him to the last day when Blackbeard was killed on Ocracoke Island in November of 1718. Caesar, he gave instructions to Caesar, his right-hand guy, African-American slave that he had liberated, on board his ship. But at the same time, people bought and sold slaves at that time, widespread. Pirates were not complete social liberators, but they definitely took, more than any other profession, blacks on their crews and assimilated them on a number of ships.
I'm fascinated with that too, because the slavery part too has been with every culture, right? And the South is this melting pot of, even like, what's his name? I was going to say DeSoto, going all the way to Arkansas area. Like, they're finding stuff. There's an archaeological dig in at the Toltec Mounds Toltec Mounds Archaeological Park, the State Archaeological Park. It's some crazy history coming out of there, and it's all connected back to him in Florida and pirates and everything. Like, they think they found his sword. And I'm like, dude, this is so cool. When you think about this history, I don't know. To me, it's very exciting, and I want to read your pirate books for sure, and all of them now. I'm like, dude. But I do want to ask you about the Joe High Eagle Environmental Sleuth series. Is that kind of a derivative of what you do as well?
Yeah, that's what I said. Kind of my first couple books were environmental thrillers that are kind of like what I basically. Joe High Eagle is kind of a stand-in for what I do, because he's a professional hydrogeologist. He plays lacrosse. By the way, I play lacrosse.
Yeah.
And I played at the Vail Shootout last summer. Unfortunately, it's canceled this summer, and so I'm a lacrosse player and a hydrogeologist. So I created this cool Cheyenne guy because of my ancestor Thomas B. Marquis, who was an Indian rights activist. He's buried next to George Armstrong Custer at the Little Bighorn.
Wow! But
he didn't fight in the battle, but he was buried there because he was an Indian rights activist and a writer and ethnographer who wrote a bunch of books on the Cheyenne and the Crow, and he's buried right next to Custer, which is so ironic because Custer, to some extent unfairly, is loathed by all Native American tribes. But in reality, he was fought them, but he did it. He admired them. He wrote books about them, he even had an affair with a Southern Cheyenne woman when he was in Oklahoma Territory. And so, there's always these gray areas with, the guys who knew the Indians and appreciated them, oftentimes were the guys who scouted them and fought them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And Native Americans hunted down other Native Americans.
Yeah.
There was, 80 Lakota Sioux, or who went after Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, and a number of them, so they all had Indian scouts were, hunting other Indians. And so it's complicated. There's a lot of grays in all of these things that we write about, especially when you get into historical fiction.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I said your last name incorrectly then, because I went all like Marquis and all French on you, and that's not right.
It was Marquis at one point, and back in like Captain Kidd's time, it was definitely Marquis and Marquess. So, but we call it it got Americanized in the late 1800s to Marquis. So, but that's okay.
Marquis.
People used to call me Marquis when I played ice hockey because it sounded like an ice hockey name.
Yeah. What I want to know is, because you like Nancy talked about passion, and you definitely have a passion for history and all those things. And part of we're the blend, and we have a problem. We have an addiction to parks because you're finding out history, and we're finding so many stories, and it's like we're in permanent college between our radio shows and travel. We're like college, and so we geek out. And when we lived in Kenya, Nancy went to write a historical novel on Kenya. And this was before computers, and we talk about this on the show, The Map of the World. I'd come home from school, and we'd fill in the map of the world. She had a big thing, a newspaper roll, and we lined the walls of the house. Seriously, because we don't care about how a house looks. It was like, we're going to get an education. So that, she had the map of the world of what was happening when in what country. So like if the typewriter was invented, it was on this side, and so she wouldn't write the wrong thing according to the timeline. So with you, even just in this conversation, it's like you've got all this in your head. You're smart, and you geek out on this. But are you creating your own encyclopedia when you write something? Go like, dude, this would be a cool nugget to put over here. Do you have 20,000 files of stuff?
No, I'm kind of like I grew up as a little kid. I was kind of a Civil War buff and sort of Western history. So I used to play with toy soldiers and read books like Churchill. Play with toy soldiers till he was 15. I was kind of like that. But I was a sports, completely hyperactive sports kid. So I played hockey and basketball. So at school, I played basketball, and I'd go home, eat dinner real quick, and play ice hockey. And I played football, and then I played baseball and lacrosse, and then did track. So I was hyperactive, but I also was this nerdy little. I loved soldier and military history from by the time I was 5 years old, and so all of this, and then being a geologist helped me put everything in chronologically, because so you kind of know, well, pirates and colonial, that's the same. People kind of forget that Hamilton, there were pirates during Hamilton, when Hamilton was making his heyday, And there's still pirates today, but kind of the romantic pirates that we typically associate with, who are a little more interesting to me. And I hate to romanticize them. I try not to, but I can't help a little bit,
But they're fun.
Right. Well,
everybody likes the naughty guy.
And at the end of the day, people are trying to just make a living in a difficult world, and you got to sympathize a little bit with it, and at the same time, they are brutal and they are outlaws. They are criminals technically too. So I try and acknowledge the reality of both sides of it. And and yet I still like movies like Bonnie and Clyde, where they're kind of cool and you like them, but they are the bad guys.
Exactly.
And so you try and find that gray area, that, a lot of times my book, well, you haven't read Blackbeard yet, but these colonial officials are sometimes 10 times worse than the pirates. You wouldn't believe the land grabs that these colonial governors did. It's outrageous.
Colonialism is one of the worst things ever that happened to this world. Colonialism it's pretty darn gross, really. Sorry, I probably pissed somebody off somewhere there, but when you look at it around the world, what it did to cultures, I mean, especially having, lived in Kenya and South Africa, you saw what happened, and how cultures were changed, and that, religion being forced on people and hair being cut over here, and all of that.
And
it was
changing their names. Changing their names.
Slavery, too, going back to the Egyptians. And, I mean, they were, brutal to the Jews, 2,000 years ago. So, and, even, some others, even Rome was, built on a, conquest, and Genghis Khan in Mongolia. I mean, conquest has been a, part of the human experience. The question is, what I try and find in these books that I write I try and find the good guys on the bad team too. So I have my books aren't like, everyone's a rabid Nazi. I have some German guys that, at the end of it, you're like, God, you're kind of rooting for that guy, some of my books. Good. But I try and, obviously you can't have them, you have to have them as the sort of progressive-minded German that's, it's kind of, is pro-German but anti-Nazi. They're not anti-Jewish, but they're still, they're still have to fight for their country. It's a little bit like the Confederates. You can't support their cause at all, but sometimes you can admire their soldierly, that they fought hard at least without throwing them completely under the bus. Otherwise, you wouldn't have books like Cold Mountain. He was a Confederate. By today's standard, he was on the bad team, but he was a good guy, right? Fighting for a bad cause, which he abandoned. So, so you got to try and find those guys, who I think that are genuine, though. You can't fake it, who are the real guys who fought on the bad team, but had some admirable qualities at least.
Well, there's a lot of people who were forced to fight regardless of whether they liked the side or not. Especially in Germany, there's a lot of people who were just forced into you will do this or you get to go to the gas chamber kind of deal. So
that's what you pick in any kind of fiction is you put people in impossible situations where they've got to pick and choose when their choices are all bad.
And I think that's life. That's life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's life.
It's especially life during war, though, which is where you're just so compromised.
Yeah.
Yeah, that gray area, though, is I think where we live. I mean, even now, people now look at what's going on in this country now in regards to the racism and the police brutality, and it's like, okay, all cops are bad, defund the cops, and then there's like, dude, I need my corner cop over here, so it's like there's this all or nothing thing going on, but in being in the middle, like I feel that way just even politically. I'm not one or the other. I don't even believe in parties, not to get political, but so I'm the weird person out, but I look at issues. And if you're an independent, now everybody's like, you screwed everything up. No, I think it's the gray area where we actually all live in a way, because how can you be all or nothing? I don't believe that. I mean, we may have that front, but I think it's that angst that is created that you will identify with a character in a book, because no matter what it is in life, we are always going to be in a gray area on something. And that's where you connect the most with the human spirit, is that gray area of angst that comes with it,
Yeah, and I think what's going on today, though, I think people are doing the right thing. I think people are coming forward now. Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, and a lot of those people are coming forward now and saying, we were wrong to have, our opinions, 2 or 3 years ago are a lot different now. So, people are sort of galvanized by. I mean, you just can't go do what happened can't happen in America. It shouldn't happen.
No.
And so there's freedom, to get back to my book. It is weird how the events of today are so mirrored by the book I wrote that came out like 6 months ago. But that until the struggle's over, until people wake up and just don't see any color and they're colorblind, this kind of thing is going to happen. It's just got to, we're getting closer and closer to being enlightened, but we're not there yet,
It's so weird because I know my parents were absolutely racist. We used to live in Sunland, in California, and you go to the pool, the public pool, because we weren't rich, and as if a black child got in the swimming pool, my mom would pull us out for health reasons, as she put it. They were totally racist, but through schooling, going to school, I didn't feel that way at all. So there was always this conflict between what I was being taught at home and what I was being taught at school. And personal experience being in a school like I went to Verdugo Hills High, they had the first black children bust in when I was in a senior in high school. And they were the Campbell twins, and they were the cutest things. They were such cute little girls. And they definitely were not black, black, black. They were light skinned, but they were bust in. And it was a big drama. And they were the nicest people ever. So I still, yeah, it's just weird. Like, I didn't get it. I didn't get where my parents were coming from. I still
and wait,
don't
was
get
this
it.
the late '60s? When was this?
Yeah.
Early '70s or?
No, late
Right.
60s. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
early.
That's yeah. See, my parents were very. They were. I had black friends growing up, and and I didn't have a ton, but I had black friends, and I was. They just raised me to be, to try and be colorblind because they just, they just thought it was wrong. So, and they didn't go preach it or anything, but it was just the way they were. So I was lucky, that I grew up with, parents that were like that, and had African American friends, and and one recently sent me a thing for my birthday thing with an old picture of me from ninth grade or eighth grade actually, and it's kind of cool because we don't keep in great touch, but we're still in touch, and his mom reads my books, and he and his mom read my books, and so.
That's cool.
Parents are the key, and but also you decide. The good thing is that you went against your parents and sort of decided on your own that it was wrong to be racist.
And she raised me with two different tribes in Kenya and the bush. So there was, my childhood was with two different black tribes in the bush, and learned, and I ended up when it was time to go to school there. I went to Snow White Nursery School, and I was the only white kid, and so it was like a complete opposite. And so it's a very interesting time, but
weird.
I just, I think it's important with what you're doing with your books because you're telling the actual stories, and you're putting it in the historical fiction, like you're saying, that's like, here's the dress and here's the real thing, you enjoy it and get connected to the characters. And when people connect with characters and it's a book, there's something like you watch a movie, I think is very effective. Movies are effective, music is effective, but a book, there's this other thing where it's your time with the book. That's a personal space. No one can tell you how to read when you're reading, right? It's a private thing, and it's your bubble where you can start thinking and making decisions and go and learn something. Get on Google, go to the places and that are written about in history, whether it's going and finding out where Blackbeard was, or going to a museum, or going to Europe, wherever it is.
Well, you can stop and think. But
yeah,
you can't
and I think
stop
that
when you're watching a movie, it just keeps moving on, and then you get to stop and think during a commercial, which is always louder.
But the
book
thing,
you can stop and think.
Yeah, and it's private, and no one can burst into your thoughts. You know what I mean? So people can make these changes internally. I think it's a very powerful thing what you're doing, and now I'm like, it's my turn to read. I want to read your book. I'm excited.
One interesting thing that sort of ties in just real quick to, that I'm working on, with this new book I'm writing about my ancestor, Captain Kidd, is, I didn't know a lot about Quakers except for that they were sort of pacifists, and that they, William Pitt founded Pennsylvania, and that, Philadelphia and those cities were very, were very tied to Quakerism. But I didn't realize that, they were one of the, first to say, no, all men are equal, and there's a divine light in all men. And it's like, and that idea, they went down to the West Indies because the Quakers, were, they were pushed out of all kinds of places, just like, a lot of religious people. But they kind of said this, they'd go around in the West Indies and kind of preaching that, every man has, is just as good as any other man, and there's a divine light or divine light in everyone, and people would just look at him like, who are the what? Are you kidding me? And it was like it was foreign. It was that foreign just to even say it. Like, this is basically 300 years ago. So, I didn't know that. I said, oh, that's kind of cool that the Quakers did that. Not only were they pacifists, but they, they kind of believed in equality. And I don't know everything about Quakers, so I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert because I'm not. But I thought that was interesting, though.
Well, look at the Amish who went and did the protests. They stood up. The Amish did, back east somewhere, and there was like this whole bunch of them that stood up and said, "Hey, don't Black Lives Matter." I mean, it's all connected in that way,
Well, they also, I have to point out, they were one of the few groups who actually said men and women were equal, not because a lot of other societies, women were second class below every kind of man.
And we didn't get to be part of the Constitution. We didn't get to write any of that stuff in there. So everybody, seriously.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I want to write it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I see people fight over the Constitution and women fight. I'm like, hey, we didn't have a vote in there. We didn't get to say it. Did Black people get to be part of the Constitution? Did Native Americans?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I know that.
Well, that's a good point.
And white British boys.
Black men got the vote before women.
Right. No, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's also it's one reason why in my books, not to relate it back to my books again, but basically I always have, one or two, very strong female characters who are overcoming all these kind of prejudices that they have to deal with. And, in the book you're reading, Angela Lang, she has to fight in a man, not only in, against the Nazis, but in a man's world and, with her father too. She's a young girl kind of battling. And there's some, kind of a little bit of, Angela's a little bit, my daughter's 18 now. Well, actually, she just turned 19. It's her birthday today. So happy birthday to my daughter if she might be listening. Yeah. But in any case, I kind of, some of those little scenes between the father and, because he's basically the good German guy. He's the soldier.
Yeah.
He's been wounded like 3 times badly.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give it away or anything, but you're far enough and not long that you know who he is. But it is sort of based, she's a little bit rebellious with her dad, but she's strong. Angela Lang, you don't get much stronger than that. And the girl, women in my Norwegian, my thriller that was, in World War II in occupied Norway, there were 2 very strong women who are heroes, and they should be, I sort of argue that they should be recognized more by Norway for their actions. But, it's like, strong women have been there doing the same thing as men all along. And it's time, that their stories they're coming out a lot now, though. There's a lot of World War II books that have come out lately about, women that are, doing very well, and tell very interesting stories.
There's women that, dressed up as men all throughout history and fought, and pretended to be a guy to get in the army in different cultures around the world, too, that we were ignored as being soldiers. And, even now, there's that shift going on in the army and the military today for women, and so it's interesting. I did want to just touch on the one thing that the 761st Black Panthers. So they really were the Black Panthers. So were they the original Black Panthers?
Yeah, they're the original Black Panthers.
Wow,
they are 100% the original Black Panthers. Oh, I can't say that there wasn't something before them, but they were the sort of civil rights group, or if you want to call them activists, late 60s group. No, the original Black Panthers were the 761st Tank Division.
Yeah.
And that was their insignia. So their motto was "Come out fighting," which came from Joe Louis, who was their idol, and it's kind of in my book, and I talk about it, But Joe Louis said, he fought Max Schmeling, the German. And who was anti-Nazi, and they became good friends. And Max Schmeling, was anti-Hitler. So they put him up to it. But the first time they fought, Max Schmeling won. He knocked out Joe Louis, or he won.
Wow.
And then he fought him 2 years later, right before the 761st Tank Division. And they said, Joe, what are you going to do? How are you going to beat Schmeling? And he's like, well, I'm going to come out fighting.
Yeah.
And that's the motto of the 761st Tank Division, and their insignia is a Black Panther with "Come out fighting" on it.
Right on.
Which is cool.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And so now, do you do a lot of research on tanks and ammunition and armor and guns and all that stuff? Do you have to understand how things work?
Yeah, I have to do a ton of research on that, and and I'm usually pretty good at it, but sometimes I try and get it as right as I can and get every gun and every weapon that's used, and and get I get into a fair amount of detail. I'm not a gun expert per se. I used to shoot guns when I was a little kid, and I liked it and enjoyed it, but I'm not a gun expert, so I have to dig deep on that and kind of beef up with every book I write.
It's technical, but I think you've got that mind. You know how to geek out on stuff, which is cool. But understanding the ammunition thing, we've been all actually some places here in Colorado where people have taught us, the different guns and everything, and then I'm like, okay, I think it helps if you shoot one, or if you get in a tank. Have you been in a tank? Have you ever been to the Patton Museum? So have you been able to get inside one?
I've been inside. Yes, I've been inside stationary tanks, but I haven't driven one. There's a place in Texas that where you can go and drive around in tanks and fire live ammo, but it costs a lot of money. But yeah.
So my God! Then you could ride a mechanical.
Yeah, you can be General Patton in Texas if you've got $5,000 to spend.
Oh wow! Okay,
for a day, and it shoot live pretty serious ammo.
No
that's
way.
Crazy.
Yeah, there's a place.
That's scary.
What's it like getting in there? I always feel like it's almost like a submarine, but our friend Mike Guardier is our military history expert. I wish he was on the segment with you. He does all that. He's in the tank thing, and he follows the generals like Hal Moore and so many. Just you guys need to meet. I want to put you both on a show together. I'd love to do that because you guys,
I think that
really need to be on a segment together. He was in doing the tank thing, so he comes on our show and educates us or me. Anyway, so the tank thing.
You can do that. You can do that when Captain Kidd comes out.
Oh, that'd be cool. We want that. I want that.
We can do pirates and tanks.
Okay,
awesome.
tanks. But don't you think it's like a submarine because you're kind of in it? Is he said it wasn't. A submarine's different. He's like it's not as. I don't know. To me, it would be. Constricted.
Well, your vision's severely limited. So usually the tank commander or TC, he's looking out of the turret as much as he can, as long as it's safe, and he's not going to get sniper fire. But he can direct the coordinates, and he's got a handheld, mic that he's talking into that they would call it like a lamb chop. It's kind of shaped like a little, and so he'd talk in, and then the gunner is looking through just his sight. But he's got a gunner sight, and he can see out too. The other vision of the driver can has vision too, obviously, but the loader he really can't see much at all. And so then you have another machine gunner in a Sherman tank,
wow.
and so your vision's limited. So but they, as long as it was safe, they come up and get air, but they were freezing cold. They had no heaters in there. Those guys at the Battle of the Bulge, in my book, I mean, they were just freezing their butts off.
Yeah.
I mean, and all day long. I mean, it's amazing that a lot of them didn't, they'd sleep in their tanks too, and they would they'd wear double clothes. They'd double up on their jackets and stuff. They didn't have winter wear. Even for the Battle of the Bulge, they didn't have winter wear by then. Even the tankers, so they would have to, they would get heat though from the shells, and so. Firing those shells, you'd get warmed up probably a little bit, but it was ice cold in those tanks. That steel would get frozen inside too because they get moisture inside. So you'd be touching like an ice igloo. It's like an igloo.
No.
They called them igloos.
Wow. And you got to think about World War II. I mean, World War I. I'm stuck with the story of the Millionaires Unit, the guys that started the Air Force, the Yale guys that did that, and then it's like go to World War II and how the airplanes changed and you get into tanks and now you're in this whole new environment. You got to think about going from you could be from the South, the swampy South, and next thing you know, you're in this frozen tank going through a country you don't know.
Right,
it's like you got to think. I mean, it's brutal, man. So thank you so much. It has been such a cool conversation, Samuel. Marquis.
Yeah.
That's
Marquis.
everyone go to SamuelMarquisBooks.com or Marquis Marquis. Samuel Mark. I don't know which one to say now.
Marquis. It's Marquis.
Marquis.
But it's okay. You're not offending me because it was Marquis, centuries ago.
Yeah. I know. I just got it stuck in my head on that now. So SamuelMarquisBooks.com, obviously Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and local bookstores as much as possible. And please support them as much as you can. So the latest one is Soldiers of Freedom. How many books do you have? The list is pretty darn big.
I think I have 11, and I'm working on my 12th.
Wow. Awesome. Well, please do come back. I want to read the pirate books and the world. I'm going to have to read them all. I'm going to have to just read them all.
Well, the next one, remember, is a privateer book because Captain Kidd, my ninth great-grandfather, was innocent.
You go.
So he was a legal pirate, which is a privateer. So I'm just kidding.
It's a Robin Hood.
So he had a work permit.
Yeah, and he went out of his way to not violate it too. But he was hung in London. But he was an American patriot.
Oh wow. Okay, wait a minute. So he ended up in London? Oh,
he was in New York, and he lived. He had an incredible house, right on the southern tip of Manhattan today, which would if he had his real estate, it'd be like worth $20 million now because he had a couple of houses. He married a very wealthy, very beautiful, very wealthy, very incredible woman who's actually featured in my new book because his wife, Sarah Bradley, who married Captain Kidd, and she's going to be a point of view character and have just as major figure in the book as Captain Kidd. But he lived in southern Manhattan and would be the most prime real estate today. And and he was fought against the French on behalf of growing America, which was still under the British Crown. And then he went on an expedition, and unfortunately had a lot of pirates on board who just kept pushing him towards piracy, which he kept fighting and not trying to do. But at the end of the day, it was the biggest pirate. He came after another pirate, Henry Avery, had gone to the Indian Ocean and completely, plundered basically $1 billion Indian Mogul ship. So it was the Mogul of India, who would be like the Emperor of India, and took all this fortune, and basically world trade was like, oh my God, we can't let piracy. So then they claimed down, and Kidd was the fall guy for the whole decade of piracy from 1690 to 1700. Was my ancestor, Captain Kidd, my ninth great-grandfather.
Damn.
And so this is going to tell his story and vindicate him because he was a heroic figure who fought in a number of battles against the French and, was a very brave guy.
But he was Scottish, right?
Well, our ancestry shows that he had a connection to Dundee, Scotland, but so it's unclear whether he was really just there and born there and was actually English, but he definitely had a strong connection to Dundee, Scotland, but there's no birth certificate. So the genealogical DNA research shows that he was from Soham, England, but he had a definite connection to Dundee, Scotland, and that still hasn't been resolved. But in any case, he came over at some point. He was a privateer fighting against a number of types of fighting. He fought with the French, and then he fought again, but not against the English, mostly against the Dutch. And then he fought with the British as a colonial American, and then but he mostly fought against the French. And then later, he got involved in that. The expedition to the Indian Ocean is where he got accused of piracy.
Right.
Because,
because he's all over. Like when we were in Kenya, they knew who Captain Kidd was.
Yeah, everyone knows who Captain Kidd is. But everyone thinks he's a pirate, and he wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. No,
he was a privateer who was wrongly accused and wrongly hung for piracy. Because the problem is he was backed by four of the most powerful men in London, and Lord Bellamont, who was the governor of back then. He was the governor of Vermont. New Hampshire, New England, and New York was all one colony for.
That's right. Yeah.
So this guy Lord Bellamont, who was a crook, So he's the bad guy in my book. Captain Kidd's the hero.
Oh, so there's a Captain Crook, and he's a crook. That's interesting.
Well, no, it's Lord Bellamont was a crook.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
okay,
Captain Cook was a British naval officer who.
That's right.
I think he was on the Hawaiian Islands and stuff.
Yeah. So when you talk about fighting the Dutch, I find this like the Dutch were often running too, and I don't want to run out of time, but the Dutch, like the Spanish, were often doing things which some were good, some were really not. The British, same thing. The sun will only set with the empire, whatever.
Yeah,
whatever. So the colonization thing, and then the Dutch, like if it wasn't for Holland, like the Mayflower wouldn't happen because everybody had to go to Holland to get on the boat to come here. So it's kind of for, isn't
and
they
New York
all
was
went
founded
to
by
Holland.
The Dutch. New York was Dutch.
Yes.
So it was New Amsterdam.
I need to learn into that. Now I have to dig into that. So now I'm going to have to like geek out all night. Thank you.
Yeah, well, there's plenty.
Well,
no,
it's interesting. We still have
empires
pirates.
were different too. Like I said, the French and the Dutch were a little more open-minded and a little more, assimilated, to some extent. And also there was Scottish. Remember, the Scottish had a toehold in Canada, and they bristled against the English. They weren't. They were, fighting it, like Braveheart, William Wallace, he was fighting against the English.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of conflict in Europe. I mean, let's face it, they've been fighting, Europe and the Middle East and and Asia, for 2,000 years they've been fighting.
Wow. I can't. I got to geek out on your books now. This is it. This is Nancy. I want the book. Give it to me now. That's it. That's my turn. I want Soldiers of Freedom, but I want Blackbeard, and I cannot wait.
See, I've read every historic novel by Leon Uris, and I've read every historic novel by William
or Wilbur Smith.
Wilbur Smith. Yes, I'm really William Kidd now. No, but I think you're the next author I'm going to read every historic novel by.
Every book, because I get this. I mean, you definitely have, like Nancy said, the passion. The passion is there, and it's exciting. You make history come to life just in this conversation. We've gone all over. I think we've covered the planet. We haven't done South America yet, but we could.
Well, plus you gave me what I like is you gave me a new book idea about Louisiana.
Yeah,
that is very interesting. The Louisiana Purchase is 1804. Yeah. And, the whole thing with Jefferson, but also pirates in that area.
Yeah.
There's some interesting cultural stuff, and, Louisiana is an interesting place.
You got to go to Natchitoches.
Natchitoches, Louisiana. So this is a very cool, interesting story. So Natchitoches is the original settlement of the state. Everyone thinks New Orleans. This is the oldest settlement.
You got
African, you got Creole, you got French, you got Italian, you got everything there. Native American, of course. And so the history there over to like Manny, Louisiana, so it goes a little east, and then you go to Nacogdoches, which is all also connected by the El Camino Real de los Tejas National, now it's a National Historic Trail, but it was a royal road from Spain. So like you go in this area, so you got this, it's swampy, and the history goes into, I mean, like I was saying, World War II, there's lumber, there's all kinds of things, but in this time frame, Churchill was a big deal over there, and what was going on between England and France affected everything. So there's this time frame. There, you have to start in Natchitoches. There's the Cane River National Heritage Area. You have to start in Natchitoches.
Go there.
And then go out from there, because the whole area is a historical heritage area to protect all the buildings, and it is so deep. I can't even. I mean, it's
you got to
really
go
deep.
there, man.
And they have all these forts, all these old forts and fighting posts, and it was all about the Spanish versus the French at one point. Everybody fought in different circles at different times according to what was going on. But the problem was why there was a neutral strip was how long it took for orders to get back to Louisiana, how long things took from England and Spain and France. And so people were making decisions, but it wasn't reaching Louisiana. So they had this area that was open.
So nobody knew anything.
Like you go to a tiny town called Wally, and they are known for tamales. And we're like, no way. Like, we've been from the Southwest, and then we know how, like, the food thing for me is very fascinating, how the Spanish came up and did stuff. Now, why do they have tamales? Well, the one lady there, she was in there. No, actually, they've done DNA tests to find out that they were actually, the tamales were not from Mexicans, it was from the Indians that lived there. And they're two different recipes. Like, all this weird, you have to go because
you got to go there.
I'm telling you, once you go there, it'll be one of those things that you will never not keep going back, and we keep going back and keep going back, and it's because of the history and because the culture is still there. They're still living it in different ways. They're keeping it alive. It's just so very real, and that area, like, it has everything. It has the World War II. They did the Louisiana maneuvers were out in that area, and so even Coxsackie National Forest, part of that was part of where they did all the landing and all the whatever they did with the maneuvers and the bombs and the tanks were rolling through there. Anyway, sorry, I got excited. It's like,
no, it's interesting.
Off in crazy land. When you talk about that area, it is, and you got to think there's gators and all kinds of things going on in the swamps, and you're out there doing things, So that the terrain is always interesting to me about how people got through things in terrains like that, and then but we're flying you over to, Germany, and now you're going to be in a tank there.
They have the first political museum in the country.
Yep.
How about that? A political museum.
But this is all how, I'm not knocking New Orleans at all. You've got to go in the northwest corner, and that's the area. And the no man's land, they've been celebrating for 3 years. It's 300 years old. And so they're doing this 3-year celebration and all these different events and Civil War history, obviously, Mansfield, and it's one of the Six-Day Battle of Mansfield. Anyway, you got to go. I can't tell the history is better. Like,
even the War of 1812 was down there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the Battle of New Orleans is one of the most fascinating battles, I think, of time of what happened and how the British talk about the privateers saved New Orleans basically against the British.
Right.
So there it is. No offense to our British friends, but we want New Orleans. It's a party town. All right, Samuel, thank you so much. Now I'm going to go to New Orleans now.
I know.
But everyone, again, SamuelMarquisBooks.com is where you want to go, and the latest book is Soldiers of Freedom, but of course there's a whole bunch more to go and read there. Thank you for joining us, Samuel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here on Big Blend Radio. Keep up with us at BigBlendRadio.com. Take care, everyone. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank
Samuel,
you.
so
Take
much.
care.
You too.